Let me begin by saying it's early in the year to declare a dumbest statement award. It's only January 6th. So that leaves us, 11 months and 25 days for people to say stupid things. But Sonny Hostin, infamously of The View, a program that I've never watched, but which I've sadly seen clips, went big yesterday. She went big. She wants the gold for dumbest statement in 2025. There was other news yesterday. Big earthquake in China and Tibet. 6.8 by the statements of the People's Communist Earthquake Society. Our U.S. Geological Society says it's 7.1. It's big. It's bad. Classic Chinese construction. Where's the rebar? And D.C. is indeed blanketed with snow, even as the New York State judges are being covered in shame, all of them, by Juan Merchan, the quote, air quote here, judge. He's an acting judge. He has embarrassed himself from start to finish in the Trump proceeding, and never more so yesterday than when he declared he's going to sentence Donald Trump this week on the 10th. The president-elect's lawyers are doing their best to point out to appeals court he really has no authority to do this. He really did make an enormous number of errors. We know that Donald Trump has not been rightly judged. It was unfair from the beginning. And all he's trying to do is earn the praise of his left-wing nutter friends in Manhattan. And that's fine. It won't matter if Donald Trump is sentenced to him to pay a fine. It will eventually be reversed on appeal. The Trump lawyers have also asked Merrick Garland to stop crazy Jack Smith. And I do think the guy is over the edge. Arjaver, from publishing a report because it could just be in crayon, I'm not sure. Everything that Jack Smith has tried blew up in his hands because he really does have a little megalomania issue going on. Let him go run for something. But that's all beside the point. Sonny Hostin, look, I don't know Sonny Hostin. I don't know her from Adam. I'm sure she's perfectly nice. But if you're going to be dumb, don't be dumb on national television. Cut number 10. Sonny Hostin yesterday.
I think we need to find moral clarity, in this country. And I just remember after January 6th, you had someone like Mitch McConnell placing the blame on January 6th where it belonged, squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders. Mm-hmm. And then you started seeing people backtrack that and losing their moral center. You had Condoleezza Rice, I believe, on this very show saying, we need to move on from January 6th. I say no. You don't move on because January 6th was an atrocity. It was one of the worst moments in American history. And when you think about the worst moments in American history, like World War II, things that happened, like the Holocaust, chattel slavery, we need to never forget because past becomes prologue if you forget any race.
All right, now, where I could begin on this, there are so many options on the menu. She cited January 6th, the riot at the Capitol, bad day. Everyone who did any illegal act there needs to and has been prosecuted. Some of them have been over-sentenced. Many will have their sentences commuted. Some will be pardoned by Donald Trump on January 21st. But to compare it in any way, she didn't even mention 9/11. Sonny forgets 9/11. To the Holocaust, World War II, and slavery tells us nothing about January 6th and everything about Sonny Hostin. She's also rocking the dating game sweater. Now, some of you are not old enough to remember the dating game. All right, you had to have been in elementary school in the 60s and get home from school and turn on either Gilligan's Island or the dating game. And the dating game had good music. If I had a producer, I would have the dating game music at this point. But if you cannot see, you should turn on the Salem News Channel just to see the dating game sweater that she's rocking. Generalissimo, do you see that sweater? Have you ever seen a sweater like that before?
Yeah, it is. It is definitely 70s. It's dating game, newlywed game material.
Yeah, well, the dating game had a set, which was just done in the panels of hideous oranges, yellows, and browns. It looked.
You know what it was? Is let's make a deal. It's a let's make a deal sweater.
No, It is a definite dating game sweater. You probably didn't watch the dating game. You're too young.
Oh, I did too.
But the dating game, that's the dating game music. Is it Herb Alpert? Probably. And I think they ought to just, someone out there with the skill set and the time should make a dating game meme with Sonny. Because that sweater, that was bad. But what was worse is what she said. You really have to lack any sense of perspective to say that January 6th is up there with World War II, with the Holocaust, and with slavery. The enslaved peoples would not appreciate that. I mean, I believe one of the rioters was killed and that nobody else died. There was a Capitol Hill policeman who died a couple of days later, but there has been no wrongful death suit connecting it up to the rioters yet, because I don't think you can do that. Scott Jennings, reliable Scott Jennings, lonely Scott Jennings over at CNN, did find time to comment on this, cut number 11.
That is so important in light of all the rhetoric and things we're going to hear people say today, is that ultimately it was the American people that got to decide ultimately how we feel collectively as a country about January the 6th. And already today, we have heard some people in other venues say extraordinarily unhinged and vile things, comparing January 6th to the Holocaust, to slavery, to World War II. I think we need to arrange our feelings and control ourselves accordingly here and not go off the deep end. It was not a good day. Political violence cannot be condoned, but we can also be measured in how we view it in light of the rest of American and world history. What's happening today is ultimately a good thing, because both parties, for the first time in my adult life, are accepting the results of an election. And that is ultimately putting this country on the right tracks. I just think people ought to really take stock of our feelings and not get out over our skis too much today and minimizing other world events and comparing them to January the 6th.
Good for Scott Jennings. Always helps to have a little perspective. You know, I began this job 8 years ago this month. I've been in radio since 1990 and television since 1992. And this is radio and television, and I've been doing it nonstop since. And I took over this time slot, 6 to 9 a.m. on the East Coast, 8 years ago in 2016, when my predecessor, Dr. Bill Bennett, retired. And I'll hand the baton over to Chris DeGaulle next week when I move to the afternoons and to noontime in the West. And I'm very happy about that move, and I'm very happy that Chris will be here to drive you to work in the morning. But I must say, I've heard a lot of stupid things in 25 years. I believe that Bill Bennett used to say routinely when we would go out on the road and do events together, Dr. Bennett would say that Americans have lost a sense of proportionality, that they no longer can assess the relative importance of an event like yesterday's earthquake in China, where thousands of people are dead, versus a snowstorm in the Beltway versus a dummy on The View. And they're not helped in this by public officials like Juan Merchan, the acting judge in New York, who is going to try and rush a sentence onto Trump so he can be a convicted felon, or Jack Smith is going to try and write another Mueller report idiocy instead of just closing up shop. And I do believe Bennett was right. Dr. Bill was usually right about the ability of American media to appropriately assess. Do you realize we had one of the largest attacks, terrorist attacks in American history last week in New Orleans? And 15 dead. I don't know if the death toll's gone up to 16 or 17, 30 injured. Could have been a lot worse. God bless the brave police officers of New Orleans who engaged the terrorists. But we had a terror attack that killed 15 people, innocent people, and wounded 30 a week ago, within the week. And Sonny Hostin goes on ABC News and says January 6th was worse than slavery and the Civil War, of course, and World War II and the Holocaust. It's so stupid as to almost defy explanation. But if you put it next to the events of last week, you begin to realize that January 6th, a bad riot, was nothing compared to the murder of 15 Americans by a terrorist in New Orleans, the injuring of 30 others. And you begin to wonder, do they have a death wish at Legacy Media? Does ABC want to bleed out? I asked the former and future president yesterday whether media was going to bleed out, and he thought that was a tough way to put it. But he agreed, probably going to happen, and then they'll rebuild. This morning of January 7th, hope you're off to a good Tuesday morning. I know some of you are shoveling out snow. Don't forget your Relief Factor. I'll do it early in this segment. Don't forget your Relief Factor. I'm in the Relief Factor studio. Those of you who are about to shovel snow, you may have waited all day yesterday and said, I'll do it tomorrow, maybe it will melt. And it did not melt. So now you have to go out and shovel. And I mean, a big, big storm hit everyone from Kansas to D.C., and people are digging out and they're using shovels for the first time in 3 or 4 years in many places. Well, if you have Relief Factor, as I do in my hand, I carry curcumin with Veritron Omega, and you take it like this every single day. And I'm going to move to the afternoon. I'm going to take it in the afternoon now, so I don't think that will change body chemistry much, since if you take it every day, you maintain the right levels of icarian curcumin with Veritron Omega in your body to fight off the ill effects of exercise and aging, the minor aches and pains that go with that. Those of you who are out shoveling snow, you're going to be different tonight. You're going to have some aches and pains. There are things in life like 2-year-olds and snowstorms that must be picked up. And when you pick them up, they assault you in different ways because you're not used to it. Takes a while, and so go get Relief Factor. Call 1-800 the number 4 and the word relief, or go to their website at relieffactor.com. Find the starter pack for $19.95 and get started on Relief Factor. Yesterday, Francis did it again. Pope Francis, worldwide leader of Roman Catholicism. My Pope, Pope for every Catholic. You don't get to choose your Pope. Your Pope is chosen for you. He did it again. Really the only job the Pope has, unless they're announcing a big article of faith, which this Pope isn't going to do. He's never going to win the spelling bee. And he's too old to actually get out of the chair. But he really doesn't like America, and he really doesn't like Americans. And he's basically an old socialist liberation theology guy who hid out during the terror in Argentina and emerged and has been pedantic ever since. It's been a failed papacy, and he knows it, and he's old, and he's bitter, and he's mad, and he's hurt. And you should pray for him because he's an old, bitter, mad, hurt guy like our president. So what's he do with his day? He decides he's going to give Washington, D.C. a new bishop. And the Bishop of Washington, D.C. is no different than any other bishop. It's not a particularly Catholic place. Archbishop Burbidge in my diocese of Arlington is a great bishop, but put there by Benedict or John Paul II, not by Francis, thank goodness. But Francis has been slowly renaming bishops in the United States. And he did it again yesterday. He picked San Diego's Robert McElroy. Now, Bishop McElroy, Cardinal McElroy, is a lefty. And that's okay. It doesn't bother me. He does not direct my spiritual life. I don't think he's a very good representative of the church for Washington, D.C. But on the other hand, people in Washington, D.C. really don't care about the church. And it just is a thumb in the eye. American Catholicism is significantly more originalist. How should I put it that way? Not conservative, originalist. It's originalism are American Catholics. So you go find the most liberal left-wing Catholic. There are two, the Archbishop Cardinal of Chicago and the Archbishop Cardinal of San Diego. And so Francis wants to elevate left-wing nuttery and throw the church into disarray in the United States. And he names McElroy. Well, God bless you, Cardinal McElroy. Good luck. Don't expect a lot of swing in the district because this Pope has basically diminished the ability of the church to be taken seriously because he's a grumpy, ill, bitter old man who is unfortunately out of touch with everything that has gone on in the church in America in the last 30 years, the renewal brought about by people like Archbishop Chaput and Archbishop Gomez and the conservatives, Cardinal Dolan in New York. American Catholicism was doing fine until Francis came along, and Francis can't dent it. It is very robust. It's doing very great. It's the people in the pews of traditional dioceses across the United States. They're packed. They're faithful. They're originalists. They are orthodox. mass attending Catholics. And they don't care what Francis thinks about politics because they don't think he's very smart. I don't think he's very smart about politics at all. And sending the headline here, Vatican names liberal San Diego Cardinal Robert McElroy as new D.C. leader. McElroy, known for pastoral approach to migrants in the LGBTQ plus community, will lead an archdiocese still bruised by sexual abuse and mismanagement scandal. You see, they've had lefties in D.C. for 35 years, and when they weren't abusing, they were covering up. And now we're just going to get a non-abuser who's daft on matters political. And D.C. will shrug them off, and no one will care because they only care about people who believe real things. They don't believe in a lot of fringe movement. Yesterday, President-elect Donald Trump, our former and future president, joined me for a half-hour conversation. All of the audio, all of it is over at YouTube, my Hugh Hewitt channel. I hope you will go there, like and subscribe, comment on the videos. I also hope you will subscribe to my podcast, Highly Concentrated Hugh. Visit my Facebook, The Hugh Hewitt Show, and all that. But whenever the former president and future president joins me, a news volcano. All you have to do is ask a bunch of questions of Donald Trump. He'll tell you exactly what he thinks, and you'll make news. And it is the business of every news guy and news gal to make news when they can, to discover news and report news. The best way to do it is to talk to the president or the president-elect of the United States. So, of course, everybody around the world is reading what he had to say. Now, many of you who listened to the third hour of the show didn't hear any of the Trump interviews. I'm about to play some of it. Those of you who did listen to the third hour of the show yesterday and heard President Trump did not hear a couple of portions of it, which I continue to talk to him during commercial breaks. I want to play for you now the conversation we had about the Navy, which reached around all the way to the Korea Times. Trump says U.S. may turn to allies for shipbuilding efforts. Of course, that's going to get the eyebrows up of the South Koreans because they have a very robust shipbuilding industry. Here is where we went to break, and those of you who are listening in hour 3 could not hear, or those of you, for example, listening on WGAN in Portland, AM 560, 98.1, I believe. I can't remember them all, but I love you, WGAN. I hope you pick me up in the evenings when I move to the afternoons. Here's what Donald Trump and I talked about when we went off the air yesterday. Mr. President, when you said they'll be held to pay if the Americans are still being held hostage, what did you mean?
Exactly what it says. If those hostages aren't released by the time I get to office, they will be held to pay. I don't think I have to go into it anyway. It won't be the word don't. You know, I heard the word don't. You can add that into it, but that would just be a small part of it. No, they will be held to pay. Those hostages have to get out. They have to get out now.
All right, Mr. President, let's turn to your legacy. You already have a legacy on the Supreme Court. I was talking about it when you joined me. And you'll add more judges, and you might get another justice. You've had the most important impact on the court of any president in my lifetime. It will get bigger. I want to talk to you about the Navy. The greatest presidents of the 20th century, Teddy Roosevelt, FDR, and Reagan, all built the Navy. Do you intend to rebuild the Navy?
I do. We have a great gentleman that had, you know, as you know, perhaps
John
you can
Phelan.
get him on your show.
Yep.
He's fantastic. John is fantastic. Very, very successful business person. Very successful, top. And he's in charge of it. And we're going to do something with ships. We need ships. And we may have to go a different route than you would normally go. That's, you know, starting to build. We don't build ships anymore. We used to build a ship a day. We don't build ships anymore. We want to get that started. And maybe we'll use allies also in terms of building ships. We might have to. We need ships. China's building, from what I'm hearing, every 4 days they're knocking out a ship. And we're sitting back watching. We've suffered tremendously during the Biden administration. All he knew about was the Green New Deal, building nonsense, giving money away, putting windmills all over the place that are destroying every beautiful plain and field and mountain. Oh, it's so sad when you fly over the country and you see all these horrible-looking structures. Half of them are closed down, rusted and rotted. Their life is over. You know, they last a very limited period of time, and then everybody just leaves them. They go to the next ripoff, and all the subsidy they get. You know, the subsidy is ridiculous. But what they've done to this, I mean, they're just destroying the beauty of our country. it's hard to believe environmentalists like windmills. Okay, it's the most expensive energy you could have.
They are not my favorite thing, but I want to stay on ships for a moment. Up in Maine at the Bath Iron Works during World War II, they turned out a destroyer every 17 days. Now they do 1.5 a year. Can you change that? Can you bring the developers' point of view to shipbuilding and get new docks, graving docks built, new ship lines open, production?
Well, that's what you need. You know, in Wisconsin, I gave out a great contract for just essentially destroyers. Beautiful. They were beautiful. I even had something to do. I'm a person that believes in the beauty of a ship. It doesn't cost anymore to have the right angles. And it was really beautiful. And they were going and really doing a good job. And the generals, the Biden admirals and generals and all of the people that are involved, they started playing around and tinkering and changing the design and this and that. You know what that costs? That costs a lot of money because now they say, oh, it's going to cost more money for something that's not as good. But they started playing around with the design. I heard about that a year later. They took what I had. It was perfect. And what it is you build it. No changes, no change orders, no extra money, no nothing. You build it. They were doing a great job. But the generals or the admirals went in and they said, oh, why don't we make it a little bit wider? Why don't we do this? Why don't we do that? And it was designed specifically for speed and other things. When you start making it wider, you start making it slower. And it was also designed on a ship that was unbelievably successful in that same class, design-wise.
Yeah, Fink and Terry designed it, and you bought it.
And they make changes. They always have to make changes. These guys get in there and they think they're smart, and in many cases, unfortunately, they're not smart. And they take something and they make it worse for a lot more money. That's what they do. I mean, they spend more money to make it worse.
To get a Navy up to even 330 ships, much less, you'd have to say every day, what have we done for the Navy today? Is that the kind of focus you're bringing in, like call Phelan every day? What have you done today, Mr. Secretary of the Navy? Because that's the focus.
That. Yeah, I'll be doing that. But we're going to be announcing some things that are going to be very good having to do with the Navy. We need ships. We have to get ships. And, everybody said, oh, well, we'll build them. We may have to go to others, bid them out, and it's okay to do that. We'll bid them out until we get ourselves ready. We're not prepared for ships. We don't have docks. Biden is closing everything. It's almost like they have a death wish for this country. He wants to close docks. He doesn't want anybody building anything. All they talk about is Green New Deal. That's the only thing they really talk about. And you know what? It doesn't work. People don't care about it. They're so tired of it. We had the cleanest air and water that we've ever had during the Trump administration. And all you hear about is what they want to do. They want to destroy our country. And that's what's happened. And that's why the election was such a tremendous success from the Republican standpoint. Hey, look, we had 7 swing states. You and I would talk about it. 7 swing states. Well, if you could win 3 or 4, it would be great. We won all 7, and we won them by a lot. They weren't close.
Yeah, you've got a mandate. That's why I want you to put everything into one big, beautiful bill, because I don't think they can say no. I want to know, though, would you put regularization of the Dreamers into that bill to attract some Democrats? We move on to the Dreamer. Now, I made so much news yesterday. I didn't make any news. Donald Trump made so much news. So much news was made on this program that I wanted to make sure we focus for a moment on the military and on the Navy. I wrote a column for Fox News this morning called Morning Glory, Trump and the Navy 2.0. And it excerpts parts of the interview, which Dwayne immediately transcribed, and we appreciate that. And we posted it. It's over at Fox News. Send it everywhere. We need the Congress to giddy up on shipbuilding. We are falling further and further behind the Chinese. Now, the Chinese do not have a 200-year tradition, 250-year tradition of the Navy that we do. They don't know how to do night landings, for example, on carriers. They've got 2 carriers, and we've got 10 or 11. I'm not sure how we count them right now. Their warships are not as lethal, but they've got more of them, and they build them for different purposes than we do. We have a blue water Navy that can go anywhere in the world, and our carriers are run by reactors, and they can go forever on their own power, but they got to get food, water. They can actually produce their own water with their desalinization units on a carrier. But our fleet has a lot of punch. And in anything other than a superpower contest with China, we would destroy the other side, as we did in the march up to Baghdad in 2003, as we did in the invasion of Afghanistan in 2001, as we've done repeatedly. And our submarine fleet is the greatest in the world, and the ships that we have are the best per inch pound of punch in the world. And so the Navy is a great thing, but it is in decline in numbers. As Admiral Stav, who will be back soon, I hope you had a chance to read his wonderful novel over Christmas, The Restless Wave. We'll get Admiral Stavridis back, and we'll talk about shipbuilding and where it's got to be and where it's got to go. And we'll talk with Senator Wicker of Mississippi, who's chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. We'll talk with Ken Calvert, who is chairman of the Appropriations Subcommittee of the Appropriations Committee in the House, about shipbuilding, all this different stuff. But what Trump got, what people don't realize, is he's already thinking ahead. We've got to up our Navy, and we're going to need, it made the Korea Times. Because Korea knows when he's talking about having our allies build ships, he's talking about Korea, Japan, and Australia. South Korea has robust shipbuilding. Japan has robust shipbuilding. Australia wants to get into it, and they have the AUKUS model, where the U.S., the U.K., and Australia work together on a submarine fleet, and we need to push that technology forward. But it's all on paper. It's not in the yards. The yards don't even exist. We don't have the capacity. It requires daily focus. And I really do hope that the incoming president calls up John Phelan every day and says, well, Mr. Secretary of the Navy, what have we done for the Navy today? If he does that for 4 years, every day, get Phelan on the phone, what have we done for the Navy today? Don't want you to leave town. Don't want you out visiting bases. I want you in your office getting our ship production back up. I want new graving docks. I want new assembly lines. We've got to lure machinists, welders, everyone who works on ships. I'm lucky to know that the head of the shipyard up in Wisconsin, where they are building the frigate, President called it a destroyer. Didn't want to confuse folks out there. It's a frigate. It's smaller than a destroyer, but it packs a lot of punch. But it's way behind schedule. That's not the yard's fault. That's the Navy's fault. The Navy changed its mind after they ordered the ship. Exactly what Donald Trump said. They started tweaking it. When you tweak a ship, everything changes. Oh, let's add you just don't add a gun or a missile tube or a propeller or whatever it is. I'm not a naval engineer. I don't know how to do that. All I know is that there has to be an unyielding daily focus. And John Phelan may be the name you hear me utter the most in the morning for the next week, in the afternoon for the next many years. I am hoping all of you know that. And I'm talking about this in the first segment because my friends in Maine listen to this hour. And this goes for Two Speeds Tony and for Brian the Banker and George the Marine and all my other pals up there. We got to get Bath turning out 4 ships a year. We got to get more shipyards reopened on that river. You folks in Maine have just been sleeping on it. I just got to get back up there more often. But I know Susan Collins will like what you heard there, as will Roger Wicker. And I encourage you to go over to YouTube, find the entire interview with the president. But I wanted you to hear that part about the Navy.
I think we need to find moral clarity, in this country. And I just remember after January 6th, you had someone like Mitch McConnell placing the blame on January 6th where it belonged, squarely on Donald Trump's shoulders. Mm-hmm. And then you started seeing people backtrack that and losing their moral center. You had Condoleezza Rice, I believe, on this very show saying, we need to move on from January 6th. I say no. You don't move on because January 6th was an atrocity. It was one of the worst moments in American history. And when you think about the worst moments in American history, like World War II, things that happened, like the Holocaust, chattel slavery, we need to never forget because past becomes prologue if you forget any race.
Welcome back, America. That is Sunny Hostin, and I didn't know that we would win the contest for dumbest thing said in 2025, in the first week of 2025, but David Drucker joins me. David, there were a lot of dumb things said yesterday in the coverage of the electoral ballot counting. Do you think Sunny wins the prize, though?
I don't know. I didn't pay that much attention to the commentary other than did January 6th go smoothly, which it did, which we all expected it to. I'll leave that up to you, Hugh.
Well, it is my opinion that's the dumbest thing we're going to hear. Comparing the Holocaust, World War II, and chattel slavery to the riot at the Capitol is kind of a reach. David Drucker, we had a terrorist event, which is what I used to bookend Sonny Hostin's comment 5 days ago. Is anyone paying attention to the fact that we had a radicalized American kill 15 and wound 30? Has that already gone off the screens?
Well, look, I think a lot of policymakers and elected officials in Washington are paying attention and are going to continue to pay attention. Something we've paid a lot of attention to at the Dispatch, but the American attention span and just this nature of looking forward tends to put these things on a back burner, and it just sort of depends on how spectacular, which I mean in a pejorative sense here, the attack was, which sort of determines how long it stays on the front page, if you will. But it's something that I expect to come up in confirmation hearings for President-elect Donald Trump's national security nominees. So I suspect we'll be hearing a lot more about this, at least here.
It's been a few years since the killer in Las Vegas, in the unsolved mystery where he killed 50-plus people. It's been a long time since the Pulse nightclub. But I think we studied those longer than we studied this. Have we learned anything about either of the two would-be assassins of Donald Trump, to your knowledge? Do we know what their motivations were? Have we traced their contacts at all?
I don't know yet that we know more beyond what we already know. I mean, the Butler, Pennsylvania assassin, attempted assassin, seemed in a sense to be, to borrow a term from the New Orleans incident, a self-radicalized individual whose politics were unclear. The second would-be assassin down in Florida clearly had a grudge against Donald Trump. But, I think this is going to be one of the questions that I have going forward is how much attention is going to be paid to the Secret Service, how it operates, does it need reform, and is the incoming administration, which is now going to be in charge of the Secret Service, going to pour a lot of energy and time and resources into this in addition to the Republican Congress?
I don't expect that. It's not high on the Trump priority list, but I think maybe Kristi Noem has got her work cut out for her because I believe Homeland Security runs the Secret Service. Am I right about that? It's out of Treasury now.
You
right,
are.
David?
It was after 9/11. It shifted from Treasury to the newly formed Homeland Security Department.
Well, we'll be watching those hearings. I do believe that we have an attention span problem and an inability to judge relative merits of newsworthiness. Now, a snowstorm is newsworthy because people are impacted by it. But I just don't understand how we can move so quickly from New Orleans to hysteria over something that happened 4 years ago. Let's talk about Juan Merchan. What do you make of the judge's rush to sentence Trump before he goes into office?
I was surprised, just simply because of the sort of political and legal conundrum it creates for the country. But, look, this was a case of all of the cases. I thought some of them, a few of them had merit. This one did not. And at the Dispatch, we always felt that this case did not. And it didn't necessarily surprise me in the case of the judge himself, but it surprised me just because, look, Trump won the election. He's about to be inaugurated president. And we know he's not going to jail. We know he's not going to jail after his term. So this is where, I put my attention other places, including still what's happening with New Orleans. And there are other things happening domestically and around the world that are my reporting is focused on.
I really have no interest in what Juan Merchan thinks. I do have an interest in the reputation of the judiciary. I have to talk to law students starting next week about the rule of law. And this guy is a rogue judge. That's all there is to it. A rogue prosecutor and a rogue judge is an embarrassment to every judge in every bench everywhere in the United States. And I wish some other judges would stand up and say, he does not represent us. We are good at our jobs. He is not. David M. Drucker on X from the Dispatch. It is always good to see you. Get that shovel out, David. Get out there and attack that snow. It's in your driveway still. Not going anywhere until you get out there. Thank you, my friend. Byron York joins me from the Washington Examiner, Fox News contributor extraordinaire, friend of the program, who I hope will be traveling with me to the afternoons at a regular date and time to be established. Byron, you going to migrate with us to the afternoons?
I am planning on taking part in the Great Migration, yes.
Isn't it a great thing to actually not have to get up? I'm not sure that you get up early to do the Hugh Hewitt show, but I appreciate that you have been here year in and year out for the last 8 years. Byron, I want to turn my scorn on Juan Merchan. I read Andy McCarthy extensively, Greg Jarrett, John, the law professor from GW. I just think they're all saying the same thing, which is an out-of-control rogue judge. Is that understood widely inside of D.C.?
Well, I wrote the same thing yesterday as well, and talked to John Yoo, not in D.C., a Berkeley professor. And the answer is yes. And the incredible thing about this is, obviously, excuse me, Trump asked for Merchan to throw this thing out, and Trump's case was really very simple, which is, the defendant has just been elected president of the United States. This is over. And Merchan refuses to accept that. And so the press has made a big deal of Merchan saying, oh, well, it's not my inclination to put Trump in jail. I'm going to just do something called unconditional discharge, which is kind of just forget about the case. There'll be no actual punishment, but Trump will still be an official convicted felon. The fact is, there's no punishment that Merchan could actually enforce, right? I mean, what's he going to do? Is he going to send the NYPD to get Trump and bring him to jail? I mean, there's no punishment that he could enforce. This case is over.
It is he could. I thought he would find the president-elect. That's what I think he'll do. Is he'll find the president-elect, and then he'll hope that it goes away. But Todd Blanche is seeking an appeal before the appellate division today.
Yeah,
if that fails, I think he'll go over to federal court. It is my genuine hope that someone in the judiciary at any level steps up to stop the rogue judge, because I think it does damage to the idea of fair due process. But I'm a Trump supporter. I didn't talk to him about it yesterday. I didn't want to hurt his chances with anyone. But what do you think? Do you think a normal judge will show up here, or a panel of judges, and say, whoa, Juan, you're way over your skis?
You know, we haven't seen full appellate review of anything, really, in this case or in any of the other Trump cases. Obviously, the closest, I guess, is that the Fani Willis misconduct stuff has gotten up to appeals courts, and basically Willis has been taken off the case down in Georgia. But we haven't seen, any real review. They haven't fully reviewed that enormous financial damages assessment on Trump in the big lawsuit in New York, the one put on by the state. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen full review of the Eugene Carroll case. Obviously, we haven't even had sentencing in this case. So all the stuff about winning on appeal, well, we just haven't had these appeals. And one thing that does come, you're the lawyer here, but I think one thing that comes from sentencing in this Merchan case is that Trump can formally begin his appeals.
Well, I would prefer he should not have judgment entered against him because he didn't break any law and no law was ever articulated. I am curious, though, Byron, when he gets into office, I hope he doesn't go after the people that tormented him for years. They actually got him elected. Jack Smith, Fani Willis, Juan Merchan, Alvin Bragg. Do you agree with me? They got him elected?
Yeah, this was the most amazing thing, I think, of the whole political season, which is looking at political conventional wisdom. You are running for office. Your opponent is indicted, and it hurts you and helps him. That made no sense in terms of conventional political wisdom, and yet that is what happened. And by the way, this sentencing is going to do the same thing, except maybe even more so because Trump is actually the president-elect, just 10 days away from taking office.
It makes me furious. And I'm not MAGA, I'm GOPE, but it makes me furious because I teach law and I try and teach people how to be good professional lawyers, and it doesn't involve show trials. Let me talk to you a little bit, Byron, about what President-elect Trump told me yesterday. He thinks the media can be turned around. I said, I think it's bleeding out. Legacy media, ABC, CBS, NBC, CNN, New York Times, Washington Post. I think it's bleeding out. He said, that's tough, but maybe they have to fire everyone and start over. What do you think is going to happen? Because when you let Sonny Hostin say stupid stuff and the show comes back the next day, or your coverage of January 6th is way over the top, I don't know that they know how to change, Byron.
Yeah, that's a huge question here, which is, I think we can all say that after the election, I thought that there would just be this huge uproar from the, quote, resistance, and they would do everything in their power to try to keep Trump from taking office. And I think clearly it has been much more quiet than that. It just really hasn't happened. And I think some people are thinking, well, it's too quiet at the moment. We don't, they're going to come after Trump. We just don't know exactly how. But the fact is, the reaction amongst resistance forces in the press and elsewhere has been much more muted than we thought it would have been. And I think yesterday Glenn Greenwald tweeted, is anyone in Washington acting as if an actual Hitler is about to take office and establish a fascist regime? I mean, is anybody in Washington acting that way? And
of course not.
No.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah,
Which
that's a good
makes you
point.
wonder whether they meant it all along.
They never meant it. Nancy Pelosi tearing up the speech behind him. It's all been bad high school theater for 6 years, 8 years now. We have been treated to over-the-top exclamations about Trump. 9 years. I guess we're 9 years since 2015.
9 years in.
And I don't think it's going to stop. And I am curious. There's going to be a state funeral for Jimmy Carter in town this week. It's probably the least emotional moment because he's so old. People don't remember him. But do you think that we'll get Clinton, W, Obama, Biden, and Trump in the room together?
Yes, I think you will. And I think that's an extraordinary thing because it'll be the first thing in my memory that includes former presidents and has Trump in the group as well. The presidential club, as it were. You see these pictures usually at funerals or some very special event where former presidents are all in the same place. So I think it'll actually. I was interested when Trump announced that he would attend the funeral because that did show him joining this group, not only being allowed to join the group, but actually choosing to join the group himself.
Yes, and I think it's good, and I think it sends a message to Juan Merchan and everyone else involved in this fiasco up in New York that these guys are presidents, and you're an acting trial judge in New York City, which is corrupt and bankrupt. The juxtaposition is going to be remarkable. Yesterday, the president and I also talked about the archivist. Now, the archivist who's in place is not the archivist who put the dogs on Trump. That's David Ferriero. I've met David Ferriero. I like David Ferriero. He was rather meek, but it's clearly TDS at work when he went after Trump much sooner than anyone would go after a president. Do you think Trump will clean house at NARA as well as at the FBI?
Can you imagine a candidate running on the platform of cleaning house at the National Archives?
Yeah.
It seems crazy, but we have had a couple of examples, and the most recent one being these pictures of Joe Biden
Yes.
Meeting with his son's Chinese business benefactors, doing exactly what Joe Biden had sworn that he had not done. And we find out the National Archives has been sitting on these photos for a long time and just, hey, right now, right before Biden's about to leave office, here they are. My goodness, they've been there all along. So I clearly that's politicized the running of the National Archives, and they do need to change from that.
And so they also have to look ahead, and we got to go into a break here, Byron. They got to look ahead to the Trump Presidential Library. And the bottom line is, I've done presidential library stuff since 1989. They are a bunch of lefties, nice lefties, and they will do everything they can to destroy a Trump presidential library. And so he's got to put someone in charge who's going to turn it upside down and turn it over. Byron, I also spoke yesterday to President Trump about the Navy and John Phelan. I was a little bit surprised by this election because he's a businessman, but do you think he can deliver what Trump was talking about, a massive upscaling of our shipbuilding effort?
Well, Congress is a part of this as well. So it depends in part on whether Trump has supporters in Congress who are pushing the Navy, as well as Trump from the White House pushing the Navy to do this and pushing the Pentagon to do this. So that answer, I just don't know, because I think the shape of how Trump is going to get his legislative agenda is still kind of inchoate at the moment. That's not a big surprise. We're still almost 2 weeks out from him even taking office, but it's just hard to say right now.
You see, that leads me to the one big beautiful bill versus two.
Yeah.
If they were going to do two, I was told by Majority Leader Thune, the first one would be the border, and it would be defense buildup and energy deregulation for production purposes. And I hope they throw in a explicit repeal of the Biden ban, which Trump said he would unban on day one. But if they go with one bill, they're going to have to jam the spending for the Navy into it. Might be easier if they did two bills to get the Navy spending and the defense buildup in the first one. Am I making that up, or do you think I'm right about that?
Well, I think that Trump's preference for one big beautiful bill is based on his own experience, because I think when he came into the White House in 2017, obviously he'd never worked with Congress before. There were Republicans in the congressional leadership who did not want to enact his agenda. And he said, oh, well, let's wait a while to do this, or let's wait to do that. Yeah, we do this right now, then we'll wait later. And I think Trump thinks he's got one chance to pass something. And the idea of, oh, let's pass this right now, and then we'll pass this later, is something that he's skeptical of, and he should be skeptical of it. So I realize the one big beautiful bill is huge, and it is more complex, and it takes a little longer to do. But it seems to me that if you want to get something passed, you do it now, and you don't say, oh, well, we're going to pass A, and then in 6 months we'll pass B, because you just don't know if that's going to happen.
And that, I'm going back to Jim Jeffords, which Byron will remember, and not many other people will. Things happen. Jim Jeffords changes parties. Events happen. Terrorist attacks happen. All sorts of things happen. And you can't be assured of getting to part two. But if you had a big, comfortable majority, you might do two reconciliations. I'm hoping they're going for one, but I don't know that anyone's really decided that yet, Byron. What's your reporting?
No, there seems to be some difference. I mean, it sounds to me like John Thune, the majority leader in the Senate, would prefer two. But here again, I think Trump thinks what he thinks for a good reason. As far as the House is concerned, I was stunned that they were able to get the speaker thing done on one ballot with literally a one vote margin. I went back and looked in 2021, which was January, which was Nancy Pelosi's last election as speaker, and there was all this talk about what a genius she was getting her troops in line with a very thin majority. She had a 5-vote majority. She lost. She lost 5 Democrats. 2 of them voted for somebody else. 3 of them didn't vote at all, but she had a 6-vote majority. And she got it. And there was this praise for her as being a master tactician, getting through something through the House, getting her own election through the House with such a small margin. Mike Johnson with Trump did it with one vote. Now, can they do that with big legislation? There will be some Democrats who probably come over.
That's why I want them to put Dreamers in it. I think Dreamers deserve to stay, but if you put Dreamers in it, I don't know how they vote against it. Byron York, thank you, my friend. Talk to you again next week in the New Times fan. Find him at Byron York on X.
Thank you, Hugh.
I talked to Byron York during the break, and I want to make sure that you have a chance to hear that. We were talking about one bill, one big, beautiful bill versus two in the Navy. Let's roll that tape. Byron, I also spoke yesterday to President Trump about the Navy and John Phelan. I was a little bit surprised by this election because he's a businessman, but do you think he can deliver what Trump was talking about, a massive upscaling of our shipbuilding effort?
Well, Congress is a part of this as well. So it depends in part on whether Trump has supporters in Congress who are pushing the Navy, as well as Trump from the White House pushing the Navy to do this and pushing the Pentagon to do this. So that answer, I just don't know, because I think the shape of how Trump is going to get his legislative agenda is still kind of inchoate at the moment. That's not a big surprise. We're still almost 2 weeks out from him even taking office, but it's just hard to say right now.
You see, that leads me to the one big beautiful bill versus two.
Yeah.
If they were going to do two, I was told by Majority Leader Thune, the first one would be the border, and it would be defense buildup and energy deregulation for production purposes. And I hope they throw in a explicit repeal of the Biden ban, which Trump said he would unban on day one. But if they go with one bill, they're going to have to jam the spending for the Navy into it. Might be easier if they did two bills to get the Navy spending and the defense buildup in the first one. Am I making that up, or do you think I'm right about that?
Well, I think that Trump's preference for one big beautiful bill is based on his own experience, because I think when he came into the White House in 2017, obviously he'd never worked with Congress before. There were Republicans in the congressional leadership who did not want to enact his agenda. And he said, oh, well, let's wait a while to do this, or let's wait to do that. Yeah, we do this right now, then we'll wait later. And I think Trump thinks he's got one chance to pass something. And the idea of, oh, let's pass this right now, and then we'll pass this later, is something that he's skeptical of, and he should be skeptical of it. So I realize the one big beautiful bill is huge, and it is more complex, and it takes a little longer to do. But it seems to me that if you want to get something passed, you do it now, and you don't say, oh, well, we're going to pass A, and then in 6 months we'll pass B, because you just don't know if that's going to happen.
And that, I'm going back to Jim Jeffords, which Byron will remember, and not many other people will. Things happen. Jim Jeffords changes parties. Events happen. Terrorist attacks happen. All sorts of things happen. And you can't be assured of getting to part two. But if you had a big, comfortable majority, you might do two reconciliations. I'm hoping they're going for one, but I don't know that anyone's really decided that yet, Byron. What's your reporting?
No, there seems to be some difference. I mean, it sounds to me like John Thune, the majority leader in the Senate, would prefer two. But here again, I think Trump thinks what he thinks for a good reason. As far as the House is concerned, I was stunned that they were able to get the speaker thing done on one ballot with literally a one vote margin. I went back and looked in 2021, which was January, which was Nancy Pelosi's last election as speaker, and there was all this talk about what a genius she was getting her troops in line with a very thin majority. She had a 5-vote majority. She lost. She lost 5 Democrats. 2 of them voted for somebody else. 3 of them didn't vote at all, but she had a 6-vote majority. And she got it. And there was this praise for her as being a master tactician, getting through something through the House, getting her own election through the House with such a small margin. Mike Johnson with Trump did it with one vote. Now, can they do that with big legislation? There will be some Democrats who probably come over.
That's why I want them to put Dreamers in it. I think Dreamers deserve to stay, but if you put Dreamers in it, I don't know how they vote against it. Byron York, thank you, my friend. Talk to you again next week in the New Times fan. Find him at Byron York on X.
Thank you, Hugh.
I am looking forward to almost every guest who's been a regular in the morning has already agreed to be a regular in the afternoon, and we're adding some additional ones, so that it's going to be great not having to do overnight news, but instead doing end of news cycle news. Just much easier, actually, to talk about that which happened 3 hours before you went on the air, or 1 hour, or while you were on air, because some happened between 3 and 6 in Washington, D.C., not many. But World news, it's all wrapped up by the afternoon. So stick with me wherever I go, and I hope your affiliate carries the show to the new time slot next week, 3 to 6 p.m. in the afternoon. If not, go get Highly Concentrated You, the podcast. Get the best of every You Do It show. And Commander Salamander is one of the great Substack writers, and he asked today, is Trump a navalist? You don't have to guess, he told Hugh Hewitt yesterday. I would recommend Commander Salamander to everyone. It's important that everyone understand that American power and standing in the world depends upon our military. The spine of our military is our fleet. Our fleet is in disrepair and shrinking, and a whole of government effort is necessary to refund, recapitalize, and rebuild the Navy. Not that our Navy isn't lethal. It is. It's just not big enough, and the Chi-Coms are intent upon ruling the waves by the close of this century, and we can't forfeit it. Now, we can build some of our ships in foreign shipyards, or we can build new shipyards, or we can do both, which is my preference, and try everything to expand the physical presence of the United States Navy. And we can't slow down. We have to speed up on things like the frigate in Wisconsin and the frigate in Mississippi and the destroyers in Maine and the destroyers in Mississippi. And I think we've got 2 aircraft carriers under construction, maybe 3. The John F. Kennedy is the next to roll off. The Dory Miller is going to come. And I think there's a third as yet unnamed, the name of which is tentatively scheduled to be the Enterprise. But I'm hoping it becomes the Trump, because if you rebuild the Navy takes care of you. It didn't get done in the first term. It wasn't a high enough priority. There was a plan, but we went through too many secretaries of defense. We went through too many national security advisors until we ended up with Ambassador O'Brien in the National Security Council, along with Captain Mark Vandroff, and some good work on the outside by Captain Jerry Hendricks and others to really focus the mind on the need to rapidly escalate our shipbuilding and our lethality and new ways of doing things. And that I am hoping Mr. Phelan embraces. And I look forward to talking to him. You don't have to be a sailor to know how to get ships in the water. You might actually be held back by being a sailor because they want perfection in everything. And I got sailors in my family, and they are very, very organized, detail-driven. They are not fly-by-night people. They have too many lives depending on them when they are embarked at sea or in the air or wherever they are, whatever their mission is. They cannot be cavalier. Civilians can be cavalier, but civilians ran the War Production Board. Civilians ran the Manhattan Project. Civilians get stuff done. Trump's a developer. And I'm going to say this speech, maybe the last time in this time zone. You've heard it before, unless you're a new listener. For 30 years, I worked for land developers, big developers, every major name in the business, not including Trump. Didn't work for Trump. But I worked for every big developer west of the Mississippi, all the way out to Palau. And the number of lawyers who do what I do are very small. They are land use lawyers that are skilled in endangered species law and wetlands law and variety of state statutes and the National Environmental Policy Act and the California Environmental Quality Act. And all. I know development. I am not a developer. I was a lawyer for developers, so I know developers. Developers are, when they put their names on building, they have some common characteristics. Very confident, big dreams, big visions, big asks, big tantrums, big everything. And when they don't get their way, they yell at their lawyers a lot. I'm used to that. Doesn't bother me. I've retired now. But I know and we need Trump the developer to attack the Navy like he did Trump Tower. We need Trump the navalist to borrow from Trump the developer's understanding of what works and what doesn't work. And I'm very hopeful that John Phelan shares that. Now, I want to go back to something that Harry Anton said on CNN yesterday. He took a look at the polls, and he took a look at what Democrats wanted out of the January 6th nonsense this year. And this is what he said, cut number 16.
If you go back, 4 years ago, right? Trump's role on January 6, 2021 should make him ineligible to be president. The clear majority of voters said yes, 56%, 56%, and that was including removal from office. But of course, Donald Trump won the presidency, and part of the reason why was because views on Trump completely shifted, including Trump's role on January 6, 2021 should make him ineligible for the presidency. By 2023, 2024, it was just 47%. So we saw this drop of about 9 points, and that, of course, is all the difference in the world, going from a majority to short of a majority. And, of course, Donald Trump won the vast majority of the other 53% who did not believe that his role on January 6th would make him ineligible for the presidency.
Still a big number, but not enough.
Correct.
Right.
This 9-point shift was...
Wait, what do you mean, not enough? Not enough for what? What is, I don't know who that host is, but when Harry Anton says it's still a big number, but not enough, that's just CNN speak for Trump shouldn't win. Trump shouldn't be president. Not enough. People had to have been madder about January 6th. You know what people concluded? Not our blue bubble judge, not our knuckleheaded prosecutor in Manhattan, but normal Americans. If Trump had been guilty of something, he would have been prosecuted for it. He wasn't guilty of anything. Right? The Alvin Bragg nonsense, no one can even name the felony. The Atlanta nonsense, that's been dismissed. The Papers case, really? The archives put the Department of Justice, sicked them on Donald Trump because he had papers at Mar-a-Lago with Secret Service surrounding it. Every president, by the way, has this argument with the National Archives and Records Administration. And then we had the Jack Smith case in D.C., which did not allege, because he could not prove it because it wasn't true, that Donald Trump had anything to do with the riot at the Capitol. And that's what I would just love for someone on the left to finally come to grips with. What Jack Smith was after Donald Trump for was for the attempt to create so-called fake electors. I don't think it would have stood the test of any kind of close legal scrutiny as to the allegation. He was not charged with inciting a riot. That's actually something you can be charged with. A handful of people were charged with sedition and convicted of sedition. They had planned on an insurrection, but there were only a handful of them. Most of the people were on a frolic and a detour that ended up being a riot, which ended up shocking the world and me and everyone else. But it wasn't Trump. Trump wasn't charged with that. Why? Because he told the crowd, long before the crowd did anything wrong, go demonstrate peacefully. End of story. No charge. Everything that Jack Smith cooked up, you would believe it had something to do with the riot. It had nothing to do with the riot. The riot was not Trump's fault. There's no proximate cause. No one can argue that. So there's nothing there. It's a complete blank. But the left can't get over it. So when Harry Anton reports that January 6th didn't really do anything to the polls, it's because the American people assessed. They're not stupid. Voters are smart. They assessed and they dismissed the radical left that is in control of the legacy media. And that is why legacy media is bleeding out. We're going to get a new Prime Minister, Pierre, up north, Poilievre. And Pierre Poilievre took to the presser yesterday and said this about Israel, cut number 15.
Yesterday you said that you endorse Israel proactively defending itself by hitting Iran's nuclear sites, which is something that President Joe Biden does not endorse. Do you not feel like this could lead to a likelihood of an all-out conventional war between Iran and Israel? And
Stop for a moment.
Not agree?
What happened to a generation of people that they can only uptalk? Dana Perino has been on the warpath about this for a decade. Do not uptalk. Do not pause mid-sentence. Don't talk like a valley girl. You're a professional. Let's start over. Cut number 15.
Yesterday you said that you endorse Israel proactively defending itself by hitting Iran's nuclear sites, which is something that President Joe Biden does not endorse. Do you not feel like this could lead to a likelihood of an all-out conventional war between Iran and Israel?
Do you know what I mean? It's when she said, do not endorse. And I want you to hear it, because whenever you hear up talking, you are either in the presence of a very nervous rookie, an ideologue, or just someone who's not very good at their job. We'll try one more time to get through a cut 15.
Yesterday you said that you endorse Israel proactively defending itself by hitting Iran's nuclear sites, which is something that President Joe Biden does not endorse. Do you not feel like this could lead to a likelihood of an all-out conventional war between Iran and Israel? And do you not agree with Joe Biden and his assessment?
I think the idea of allowing a genocidal, theocratic, unstable dictatorship that is desperate to avoid being overthrown by its own people to develop nuclear weapons is about the most dangerous and irresponsible thing that the world could ever allow. And if Israel were to stop that genocidal, theocratic, unstable government from acquiring nuclear weapons, it would be a gift by the Jewish state to humanity.
Thank you, Pierre Poilievre. What a difference a day is going to make. Justin Trudeau threw the towel in yesterday, cut number 14.
Over the holidays, I've also had a chance to reflect and have had long talks with my family about our future. Throughout the course of my career, any success I have personally achieved has been because of their support and with their encouragement. So last night over dinner, I told my kids about the decision that I'm sharing with you today. I intend to resign as party leader, as prime minister.
All right, that's all we wanted to hear. Go home, Justin. Thank goodness for small favors. I forgot to do the market report earlier, brought to you by AmericanFederal.com. AmFed Coin and Bullion are the very best people to buy gold from or to sell gold to, because they are straightforward and honest professionals who've been doing this for 40 years. Nick Rovich and his team will just deal with you on the phone. They'll tell you how to execute the transaction. You tell them how much you want to invest in physical gold. They'll tell you how much it buys. They'll tell you their commission. It's transparent. It is no muss, no fuss. And they bring us the market report every day looking backward. Interesting, when the program moves to the afternoons next week, I'll do the market report after the bell. So I'll be able to bring you the bell. In the mornings, there's nothing to tell you about except what happened yesterday. The Dow was off 0.06. The S&P was up 0.5%. And the NASDAQ had a big day, up 1.24%. Gold ticked up a little bit to $2,660 an ounce. So if you call up Nick and his team at 1-800-221-7694, 1-800-221-7694, you can get an ounce of gold for somewhere around $2,660. You have to pay a commission on it. The more you buy, the less the commission. If you want to sell your gold, you're not going to get $2,660. They have to make money on it, and they have to evaluate it, and they have to find out how much of it is pure gold, is it real. But the one thing I can tell, they're honest. They don't get sued. They're wonderful people. They do what I'm telling you. They buy and sell gold. If you're a coin collector, yes, they will talk coins with you all day long, because that's a fun universe for some people. It's not my thing, but I've known people who've been coin collectors for a long time. So if you want to do that, you can also call 1-800-221-7694. Most people that I know buy gold as part of diversifying their wealth. They own dirt, they own stocks, they own bonds, they own mutual funds. They're not smart enough to beat the market, so they diversify their investments. That is, I think, generally the first thing that any professional investment advisor tells people: diversify, diversify, diversify. And don't get stuck in one sector. Don't get stuck in one play. Don't get stuck with only gold. Don't get stuck with no gold. Whatever you do, call Nick and his team, 800-221-7694, or visit their website, AmericanFederal.com. Now I want to tell you a story. When I turn in early on the West Coast, I usually listen to sports to close down the day, get my mind off of politics, and then I'll listen to history to really wind down, because history will put you to sleep. I've been listening to a great book that was written in 1925 on the American frontier. But before that, I listened to Kings of the North. There are two great college football podcasts out there, and a third that is Ohio State specific. Ohio State specific, Buckeye Talk at cleveland.com. Stephen Means did it solely yesterday. It was great. The coach, Coach Urban Meyer, is one of three hosts on Triple Option. And Rob Long, Mark Ingram, and Urban Meyer, great overview of college football. And Urban Meyer actually knows more than anyone. That's why I listen to that. He's the best commentator on football who is available. There are coaches who know football as well, but they're not talking every day the way that Urban is, or twice a week on Triple Option. Then there's Kings of the North, Doug LeMarise and Bill Landis. And I've grown to really love this. The Buckeye Talk is Ohio State specific. Kings of the North is college football, the North versus the South. And in fact, the North has been crushing the South. The SEC has been embarrassed this year, and we all love that. And I know you folks listening in Atlanta, you won't stop listening to me in the afternoon in Atlanta, because I'm just telling you the truth. The SEC is very disappointing this year, and now that the Big Ten is the Big 14, they're beginning to dominate the sport, and that's fine. Or the Big 16, I can't remember what we are, but the Big Ten is the dominant conference. In any event, they were talking about this last night, and they were talking about the fact that increasingly the NCAA is making it possible for players to play longer than 5 years. Used to be you got a redshirt year plus 4 years of eligibility, 5 years. Apparently there are some players who, there's a new rule that if you go to JUCO, junior college, and you play there, that doesn't count against your college eligibility or your redshirt year. And then there are lots of rules to add another year. And there are people who go 8 years with one football team. That's not good for the sport. It's very bad. But when I heard Doug LeMarise talking about you're taking the place on the roster of an 18 or a 19 or a 20-year-old kid, I thought, Doug doesn't know it, but he just made the case against affirmative action. Whenever you use affirmative action, McDonald's abandoned DEI yesterday. We're not doing that anymore. Good, because whenever you hire on other than merit, you're closing the door to the person who would have been hired on merit. Whenever you let someone play football for 8 years, you're closing the door on a bunch of kids who wanted to play football and don't get to play football because your roster can only be so big. When you let people into colleges or universities or graduate schools based upon race or immutable characteristics or on gender or ideology, you're shutting somebody out. It was, when I listened to it, I was thinking, that's what Bill Bennett's been arguing and Terry Eastland since the 70s. When you count by race, like when you count by years of eligibility, you leave people out, people who deserve to be in, over the people who got selected for non-talent-based reasons. Kings of the North, I recommended highly to you yesterday's edition especially, and then just think about affirmative action and DEI throughout that conversation about college recruiting. It's got nothing to do with race or gender. It's got everything to do with talent. Joined by Bret Baier, who is, of course, the host of Fox News Special Report every night at 6 p.m. Good morning, Bret. Are you shoveled out yet, or are you out of D.C. in time to avoid the snow?
No, I'm here in D.C. I'm shoveled out. We've been back and forth to the studio, and I'll be heading back up there shortly. But not bad, not horrible, but it definitely got some snow.
There have been years in D.C. that everything shuts down for a week at a time. So if you're back at work the next day, it's not that bad of a snow. Bret, I want to go back to when you drove up to D.C. in 2001 to begin covering the Pentagon on 9/11 for Fox. At the time, a man named Gordon England was the Secretary of the Navy. He went on to become the DepSec at Homeland Security, the DepSec at Defense. Did you ever have any dealings with Secretary England when he was running the Navy?
I did, yeah.
Do you think that is the model that Phelan is? Because John Phelan, the former and future president, was talking up John Phelan to me yesterday. I'm looking forward to talking to him, but he's not a veteran. He's a businessman. What do you think of that choice?
Yeah, I know him, and I know him to be a tough business guy that has said he's really committed to taking the screws to the Navy budget and to make sure that the president gets what he wants as far as shipbuilding. And, you know, as you guys talked about yesterday, and I thought that discussion, you know, while the Dreamers section of your interview got a lot of attention, I thought that the discussion about building ships and how to do it and the fact that we don't have the capacity and figuring that out is really a big thing when it comes to the Pentagon and national security. John Phelan's going to be somebody, I think, that is committed to that. Is a unique choice in being a business person, not a veteran, but it is somebody who has a lot of ties to the military community and who is really well respected in the business community.
This is why you ask questions. I had no idea that Bret knew John Phelan. I've not met him. Tell us a little bit about him, because to an extent I don't think Americans appreciate, our freedom depends upon our Navy. We are a sea power, and we've allowed it to just slowly decline, and we need a layman. Has John Phelan got that kind of ability?
Yeah, he's a tough guy. He worked with Michael Dell. He's done like big contracts. He's dealt with big companies. He's not afraid to challenge the status quo, and I think he's convinced and talked with, from everything I can see, President Trump about his vision about shipbuilding, about how the Navy should run. So, listen, what you have to have is people that are willing to make tough choices. Business people are uniquely positioned in having dealt with big companies and big decisions to be able to do that. Of course, there are battles back and forth with the military inside, saying you need to have this sense about how people are dealing with the day-to-day and sailors. That's all part of it, and I think that it's going to be an interesting choice. I think there are a number of choices. The Army Secretary as well is of the business mind set to try to put these organizations on track.
No, what's interesting, a collision is coming. Roger Wicker is chairman of Senate Armed Services. He's a navalist because Mississippi builds ships, and he wants to build a lot of ships. I'm not so sure about House Armed Services or whether or not Mike Waltz is going over to the White House as his Green Beret is going to have his prejudices. Do you think we will break from the basically one-third model for Navy, Army, Air Force and get more towards a 40-45% of the Navy, Bret? Because that's actually where we need to be.
Yeah, I do. I actually do. And I think that the threat from China and all that they're putting into their naval assets across the board, deep blue water and other ships, I think is a legitimate threat that comes up every time we go through the assessment about the world threats. So I think that the Trump people incoming understand that, and that's one of their goals.
Trump also mentioned buying warships from allies, something we're prohibited from doing by law, which I wish we would do, because South Korea and Japan have just got a lot more capacity than we do. Do you expect that to actually happen? Because organized labor will not like that at all.
Well, you can't talk about the Jones Act without running into a wall. And so,
by the way, you win Hugh Hewitt bingo. No one knows the Jones Act except Bret Baier. Okay.
There you go. I mean, it's basically in layman's terms fought by every union because of union workers, American workers wouldn't be on building those ships. There's going to be some collision on that. I don't know when it's going to come or if it's going to come, but there will be some battle back and forth about how that goes forward.
Now, I may be inventing a false memory here, Bret, but I think you covered on Special Report at some point the fact that we have a critical shortage in craftsmen of the sort that you need to build ships, welders, electricians, all those sorts. Did you cover that at some point? I thought so. So how would we go about, anyone come up with ideas about how to go about addressing that problem?
Well, I mean, there's a long-term, effort to redirect people, maybe kids that don't want to go to college that go into different efforts, but that's years in the making. And trades, there's all kinds of efforts about to get trade schools up and going around the country. But that takes a while, and it's not in the process as of yet. Some places are doing it, but not many. I think that there's a real, there's going to have to be a system-wide change for us to do what they want to do. And without doing that, you got to figure out a way to have other people build them or have the ability to buy them someplace else.
You know, there are some very serious Democrats on this. Angus King, independent, but he caucuses with the Democrat. Jack Reed. There are some
Mark
serious, serious navalists out there. Do you think they'll help Trump if he's serious about this, or will they be shamed into silence?
I do. I mean, I had Mark Kelly and Mike Waltz on my show for Common Ground talking about this very thing. And, you know, they know that there has to be a big change when it comes to that production.
I hope it makes it into the one big beautiful bill. Two quick questions. Do you think we're going to get one big beautiful?
Hold on. Let me ask you a question. Didn't you see some wiggle room in his answer to you on the one big beautiful bill?
Oh yes, there was more wiggle room than a rumble line.
Yeah, I mean it was a Lincoln Tunnel worth of.
He does without congestion pricing. He doesn't want to commit. He just wants to get along with everyone. This is so different from Trump 1, isn't it? He likes Thune. He doesn't want to get in a fight with Thune.
Right. And I think, you know, they want him to say this is definitive, but there's still this battle, and I think we're still going to see it play out as they make the arguments. Mark Dixon made the argument for 3 bills, 2 this year and 1 next year.
There was so much. I'm glad you heard that. I didn't follow up on it because it would have been, you get 30 minutes. If you go off on a tangent, you're never coming back. We could have ended up in the Canadian forest if I wasn't careful.
Right.
We were almost off to the Yukon. Bret Baier, I want to tell you about Juan Merchan. Does anyone, when the cameras are off, any Democrat admit to you they're embarrassed by this? He's a rogue judge, and this is a rogue move to try and sentence Trump this week.
I think there are a lot of Democrats that privately are very upset that that's moving forward the way it is. I've talked to a few who say why. It's done. I think the appeal is pretty strong as it is, but what it does do is it wraps that up and starts that appeal process in New York. Mark Levin and others have said they should short circuit everything, go to the Supreme Court. I think, I had Jonathan Turley on last night who said, and he sat in that courtroom and really believes that there's numerous ways to appeal this by the way that it was handled.
Yeah, I think the good professor is right. I just think he set the sentencing so that there's not enough time to get over to the New York Appellate Court and have turned down there to get over to a federal court to enjoin sentencing because they want to embarrass Trump. I mean, does that make political sense to you? Just embarrass Trump again? It doesn't really make any sense to me.
Well, no. And from a politics standpoint, if you do the analysis on the 2024 election, I think you will find that the lawfare and how it was stacked up like planes coming into Dulles on Donald Trump really turned people, even independents, who suddenly said, wait a second, this is wrong. This feels wrong. And I do think that they started to believe fully that Donald Trump was getting the short end of the stick from a very aggressive DOJ and special counsel and New York authorities. So it actually helped him. So in politics, I think it goes the exact opposite way.
I'll be watching on Special Report tonight to find out whether or not the Trump appeal to the New York Appellate Division gets a successful hearing throughout the course of the day. Bret Baier, good to talk to you. I hope you join me in the afternoons when I move next week. Boy, the 10-year Treasury went up yesterday to 4.63, and my friends at andrewandtodd.com are going to have to scramble to help people find a home and finance a home. andrewandtodd.com. Great sponsors are going with me to the afternoon. Finally, we'll be able to tell everyone across the country at the same time, if you're buying a house, go to 888-888-1172. Call Andrew Del Rey, Todd Avakian. They are with Sierra Pacific Mortgage. They are the best in the business. They've been one of my sponsors for a decade. They're going with me the afternoons next week. I am so looking forward to introducing. That's actually a public service. When I connect people to Andrew Del Rey and Todd Avakian to do their home loan, they thank me. They write me a letter. They say, those guys are wonderful. I know that. I've known Andrew for more than 20 years and Todd half as long. Great Christian men. I was in a Bible study with Andrew. And they find you the best rate they can find for you. They help you with your credit. They help you get a pre-approval letter so that in a competitive market, you can make the biggest bid you can, and they don't give you bad advice. And if you have to buy a house now and your loan's going to be in the 7s probably, maybe the high 6s, they'll refinance with you. You won't even have to prompt them. They'll call you. but you got to get started. I cannot wait to introduce the rest of the country to andrewandtodd.com. Best people in the business at financing your mortgage. Let me now go to Mark Zuckerberg, who made an announcement this morning, which I think is pretty significant. Let's play that tape.
Hey, everyone. I want to talk about something important today because it's time to get back to our roots around free expression on Facebook and Instagram. I started building social media to give people a voice. I gave a speech at Georgetown 5 years ago about the importance of protecting free expression, and I still believe this today. But a lot has happened over the last several years. There's been widespread debate about potential harms from online content. Governments and legacy media have pushed to censor more and more. A lot of this is clearly political, but there's also a lot of legitimately bad stuff out there. Drugs, terrorism, child exploitation. These are things that we take very seriously, and I want to make sure that we handle responsibly. So we built a lot of complex systems to moderate content. But the problem with complex systems is they make mistakes. Even if they accidentally censor just 1% of posts, that's millions of people. And we've reached a point where it's just too many mistakes and too much censorship. The recent elections also feel like a cultural tipping point towards once again prioritizing speech. So we're going to get back to our roots and focus on reducing mistakes, simplifying our policies, and restoring free expression on our platforms. More specifically, here's what we're going to do. First, we're going to get rid of fact checkers and replace them with community notes similar to X, starting in the US. After Trump first got elected in 2016, the legacy media wrote nonstop about how misinformation was a threat to democracy. We tried in good faith to address those concerns without becoming the arbiters of truth. But the fact checkers have just been too politically biased and have destroyed more trust than they've created, especially in the US. So over the next couple of months, we're going to phase in a more comprehensive community notes system. Second, we're going to simplify our content policies and get rid of a bunch of restrictions on topics like immigration and gender that are just out of touch with mainstream discourse. What started as a movement to be more inclusive has increasingly been used to shut down opinions and shut out people with different ideas, and it's gone too far. So I want to make sure that people can share their beliefs and experiences on our platforms. Third, we're changing how we enforce our policies to reduce the mistakes that account for the vast majority of censorship on our platforms. We used to have filters that scanned for any policy violation. Now, we're going to focus those filters on tackling illegal and high-severity violations. And for lower severity violations, we're going to rely on someone reporting an issue before we take action. The problem is that the filters make mistakes, and they take down a lot of content that they shouldn't. So by dialing them back, we're going to dramatically reduce the amount of censorship on our platforms. We're also going to tune our content filters to require much higher confidence before taking down content. The reality is that this is a trade-off. It means we're going to catch less bad stuff, but we'll also reduce the number of innocent people's posts and accounts that we accidentally take down. Fourth, we're bringing back civic content. For a while, the community asked to see less politics because it was making people stressed. So we stopped recommending these posts. But it feels like we're in a new era now, and we're starting to get feedback that people want to see this content again. So we're going to start phasing this back into Facebook, Instagram, and Threads while working to keep the communities friendly and positive.
I just think this is the best thing that Meta has done in a decade. I'll expand on this with Senator Cotton afterwards. I'll have, I think, the number 2 at Meta on tomorrow to talk about this. We'll put out the ask, get it scheduled, but this is a very good thing, and it reflects reality, something Juan Mershon could use an acquaintance with. Senator Tom Cotton is from Arkansas, and the poor SEC people are wandering around having been thumped repeatedly by Big Ten teams across the country, but I think he's regained his balance. Good morning, Senator. Welcome back.
Good morning, Hugh. It's good to be back on with you one final time in the morning.
I will find you in the afternoons. I hope your team will find you in the afternoon. A little bit harder to find a senator in the afternoon, but maybe we'll finally get you on video. Senator, I want to ask you about Mark Zuckerberg. Released a statement this morning. I think it's great news. They're getting out of the content moderation business almost completely. They're still going to go after child porn and terrorists, but they're dialing it way back on politics, on gender, on things like that. What do you think of that turn in direction at Facebook Meta?
I welcome the announcement that Mark Zuckerberg made this morning, as well as the promotion of Joel Kaplan to the head of global policy. I'm sure that Joel played a role in crafting these new policies as well. Joel is a long-time, well-known Republican and respected in Washington and around the policy-making world. I think increasingly what you see with Mark Zuckerberg at Facebook and Elon Musk at Twitter is a recognition that these digital online platforms should reflect the same kind of principles that we share in the real world. And in the real world, of course, we don't tolerate crime. We find child pornography or sex trafficking abhorrent. We use every tool to crack down on it. But we also allow people to speak their mind and engage in open, free debate. We don't try to censor them. We certainly don't, try to take their jobs or their livelihoods away from them, as many people do make their livelihoods online these days. That's why I think it's such a welcome development, is it reflects the best of the American tradition of free speech and debate, which we've always had in the real world, carried to the digital world. Elon Musk did that first at Twitter. Now Mark Zuckerberg is doing it at Facebook.
Now, I have been reading, Senator, or listening before going to sleep, to a wonderful book from 1925. A guy named Frederick Paxson wrote History of the American Frontier. And it's a classic. And, the settlement of America doesn't really change much. The facts don't change much. So old books can be very good books. But it's deep in our DNA, stuff that we learned on the frontier. One of the things that's deep in our DNA is free speech. Do you think big tech may have lost that thread for a while?
For a while, Hugh, I think it's fair to say they did, going back at least probably 10 years to the start of, BLM rioting in the streets in Ferguson, but certainly carried through the summer of 2020 with COVID lockdowns and the George Floyd BLM Antifa riots. They got caught up in the Jacobin spirit on the left coming out of 2020 and tilted way too far towards censorship, towards collaboration with a heavy-handed Democratic administration. And I think you see the reflection of that in some of their user data and the backlash against them. And that's, again, why I think it's so welcome that Mark Zuckerberg is bringing Facebook back to its roots of being an open platform in which people can debate ideas and not worry about censorship, or can, advertise for their small business or create, hobbyist clubs or what have you, as opposed to be an engine for censorship, which too many tech platforms were in the late 2010s and early 2020s.
So that's the good news of today.
Kind of an end of an era.
I want to go back now to the good news from yesterday, the conversation I had with President-elect Trump about the Navy. Now, you're a soldier. You're an Army guy. So I hope you can put that aside and talk about the fact that Donald Trump seems pretty committed to a rapid upscaling of the United States Navy. Will there be support for that in the Republican caucus?
Yeah, no question about that, Hugh. And of course, America has always been a maritime power. As you and Larry Arnn sometimes point out in your Friday conversations, we're over here on the other side of the world, surrounded by two big oceans. And the vast majority of the world's people and land and markets and resources is on the other side of the world. So we've always had the need for a strong Navy to protect our interests, to keep ourselves connected to our allies in the old world, deter aggression from the old world projected into the new world. Republicans in the Senate are committed to helping the Navy get back on track, not just improving the pace at which it's building ships, but also the way those ships are armed. It's going to take a while to get shipbuilding back on track. We can do that in the Trump administration, but things that we can do immediately is to make sure that every ship we have at the moment is armed to the teeth, that our so-called magazine depth of Standard missiles and Tomahawk missiles and so forth is completely full. And that's what we hope to do in this year's budget bill, is to give the military the badly needed increases in resources that the Biden administration has deprived of for 4 years.
I'm going to come to the one big bill versus two in just a moment, Senator. But first, I want to ask you about John Phelan and Pete Hegseth and Bridge Colby and everybody else. There's a slate of nominees at DOD. You're on armed services. How quickly can we move those? Because there's a lot of work for Trump 2.0 to do at the Pentagon.
Yeah, I think we'll move promptly, Hugh, not just on those DOD nominees, but all nominees. We have a long list of hearings next week across the Congress. Pete Hegseth has his hearing at Armed Services. I'll be chairing the hearing for John Ratcliffe and Tulsi Gabbard at the Intelligence Committee. All of my counterparts are chairing hearings as well. I think we're up to 17 hearings next week. So the moment Donald Trump steps off that platform on January 20th and goes into the Capitol, he can sign all their nominations and we can start processing them right away. And we're committed to staying in session much longer than the Senate has done in the past to make sure that we are putting those nominees on the floor, getting them votes and getting them work. Because you're right, there's a lot of work to be done. 4 years can seem like a long time when it's Joe Biden, but when you're in charge and you're trying to make a difference, every single day counts.
No, it's going to be gone before we know it. We're going to blink and it's going to be over. Now, Senator, yesterday the president-elect wiggled a bit on the one big beautiful bill versus two bills. Now, Majority Leader Thune is an advocate of two bills. Jason Smith will be on tomorrow, chairman of House Ways and Means. He wants one big beautiful bill. Donald Trump, as Bret Baier correctly heard and pointed out on the program this morning, left himself a lot of room to go either direction. What do you think is going to happen?
Yeah, Hugh, I'd say whether it's 1, 2, 3, or 10 bills, the Republican Congress is going to keep taxes low. We're going to secure the border. We're going to build up our military. We're going to unleash American energy production. Most of those are procedural questions the American people are not going to follow. What they are going to think, though, in 2 years, when we have midterms, and 4 years to the next presidential election, is, do I have more money in my pocket? Did we stop the slow motion invasion at our southern border? Is America strong and respected again around the world? And I'm confident that Donald Trump and a Republican Congress is going to deliver those results to the American people.
Now, how does one? I actually think that there's a lot of interest in the weeds here, just because it talks about whether or not we'll have certainty on taxes. And I made the argument that Majority Leader Thune, as a small business person, I'd really like to know what the rates are, and I'd like to know whether or not there's going to be a one-time window for conversions of IRAs to Roth IRAs and generate revenue that way, all that sort of stuff. When do those decisions get made? Because indecision is itself a decision.
Yeah, those specific tax provisions are under consideration right now, Hugh. There's some what you might call preliminary or threshold questions. We have to address what's going to be the total budget number for this process this year, and how much money do we hope to cut from the bloated spending budgets of the Biden years, which I hope will be substantial. And then once we kind of know the parameters, that's when we can get down to the specific questions that you raised about individual rates or how long those rates will be in place. My hope would be permanent. Whether we can address some of the provisions in the code that I think remain unfair. But the initial questions will be those kind of higher level questions about the size of these bills, what we're going to do to address the bloated spending of the Biden era and try to get deficits under control. Then we'll move on, probably just in a matter of weeks, to those individual and specific provisions.
Senator Cotton, in terms of your new colleagues who have joined the Senate, have any of them joined your committees?
We have on the Armed Service Committee the addition of Jim Banks, a Navy veteran from Indiana, and Tim Sheehy, a highly decorated combat wounded Navy SEAL from Montana. I think those are the only new members on the committee on either side, and very welcome additions. I think it's always a good thing when we bring new senators with a fresh perspective, sometimes very recently from the battlefield and the service, who still have friends in the service like I do, not at the 4-star level, but at the company grade and field grade level, who can get the ground truth. So I'm very happy that both Senator Sheehy and Senator Banks have been added to the committee. I expect them to be highly contributing members on a committee that's going to be working on some very consequential national security matters over the next 4 years.
All right, last question, Senator. Bret Baier brought up the Jones Act. Not to make my audience drive off the road with their eyes closing. The Jones Act just basically mandates warships be built in the United States, in not South Korea, Japan, or Australia, or any other place of our allies. The president-elect yesterday said we got to look at that. If you got Angus King and Jack Reed, two semi-serious Democrats on armed services, do you think there's something to be done about the Jones Act so we could at least try for a 5-year period to do some shipbuilding with our allies?
Well, you first take a step back in the Jones Act, because it's not just military shipbuilding. It is all shipbuilding. And there are reasons why we don't want foreign shipbuilders, or especially foreign piloted or crewed ships on America's waterways. You just look at how China has infiltrated our society and infiltrated our businesses. That said, as President Trump acknowledged yesterday, there's a urgent crisis in shipbuilding and ship maintenance as well. For our military. And I think we have to be very open-minded to try new solutions to address that crisis, something that we might not have tried 30 or 40 years ago when the American shipbuilding industry was much larger and more robust than it is now.
I look forward to those conversations. Senator Cotton, thank you. I look forward to talking to you in the afternoon next week. I appreciate 8 years. Senator Cotton rarely missed his appointment on the Hugh Hewitt Show, and I really appreciate that, Senator. Be well. For 8 long years, I put my next guest on my back every morning and carried him into his show. Mike Gallagher has the time slot right after mine, and every single morning I deliver him millions of people, and he fritters them away. But he's just come back for his 1 week out of 4 of working. He normally takes about 3 weeks out of every 4 and goes off to London. But he was in London and something happened to him, so I wanted to check in. Are you okay? Did the Englanders let you out?
I survived, but first of all, I'm heartbroken because, I've had the best lead-in for 8 years, known to man. Chris Stigall has big shoes to fill. We're thrilled for you. Even that miserable Dwayne is going to be happier, and that's my theory. Dwayne's always miserable because he has to get up at 2 in the morning or midnight or whatever. Now you guys get to live like normal people. You're not Dracula anymore, and you got
Shouldn't you be in Greenland with Don Jr.?
I'm on my way. I'm packing my bags. Well,
but Gallagher,
I couldn't find Greenland on a map.
I'm going to miss you,
right?
But I want to hear about the ABBA voyage. You sent me a cryptic note about something that happened to you on your 8 weeks in London. Mike takes 8 weeks off, December and January, and I just want to know what happened that you actually would notice something.
Well, so Mark Davis, our buddy in Dallas, recommends a show called ABBA Voyage when I went to London. And I didn't know anything about it. And look, that's the music, 70s music. That's my vibe. I love 70s music. I'm sure you guys do too. And I go to the ABBA Theater outside London. Now, Hugh, I don't know anything about it going in. I don't know who's performing, how it's going to work. 4 people rise up to the stage as the show starts. And I'm looking at them thinking, gosh, that looks just like ABBA from the 70s. It's 4 people. Now, if you had to hold a gun to my head and make me swear on a Bible that those were 4 people up there, I'd say, absolutely. These are 4 people. The band is off to the side. They're playing. ABBA's doing their thing. They're talking to the audience. At one point, one of them, Bjorn or Benny or whatever, says, I look pretty good for my age, don't I? Because I'm thinking, these guys are in their 70s. And they're interacting with the audience. Long story short, show gets over. Then they leave. The 4 ABBA people who are now in their 70s come out and take a bow. I'm thinking, what is going on? Were those 4 impersonators? Were these the 4 original? Hugh, the whole thing was done virtually. Industrial Light and Magic created this thing. They're 4 virtual avatars. Now, the band is live, incidentally. This thing is sold out every show. I felt stupid afterwards because as I read about it in the Uber on my iPhone, I'm thinking, I was clapping for, a video. But it's so real, Hugh. I would swear that those 4 people were up there. And the technology
we got to tell people, you actually know what you're talking about here. You are a theater. You are Equity Actors Guild. Live performance. And they fooled you.
Oh, I didn't even afterwards. I thought they were 4 impersonators. And you know what happened? Quick backstory, because I read all about it afterwards. The original band members, who are in their 70s and 80s now, they actually went into a studio and put on one of those green suits with dots on it, and they did the stop motion action, whatever, for the whole show. And then they were transformed into their youthful selves, fooling dopes like me from across the pond who thought that they were up there performing for 2.5 hours. Think about the possibilities here in the U.S. Think about it. You could do the Beatles. You could do Elvis, Pavarotti. And, this isn't like a hologram in Vegas.
Wait. Is this a bad? You need to talk to your audience about, is this a good thing or a bad thing? Because you're putting a lot of people out on the street who need to be their live equity actor gigs, right? If this takes over, they're all going to be out of work.
And isn't that the scary aspect of AI? And you talk about it often so brilliantly about this brave new world we're in. Look, people can imitate you, me. Family members can call Granny and say, give me $10,000, and it's in that grandkid's voice. I've never been fooled like this by technology, and it was the most extraordinary. I can't stop talking about it because
you were fooled by going to an ABBA show.
It's just
go
away,
on,
Grumpy.
Dwayne. You like ABBA.
I know Dwayne actually has ABBA on
playlist,
24/7. Yeah. Mike Gallagher, I look forward to hearing more about this on the Mike Gallagher show, but I must tell you, my back is already feeling better. I'm not carrying you to every show, but across the Salem News Channel and our network, Mike Gallagher is coming up next. That's his report. When you go on vacation next, Mike, next week? Are you going back on vacation next week?
We're going to the inauguration. We're covering that's work. That's a working trip in D.C.
I knew
I got places to go, things to do, people to see.
You are always guest host galore. Mike Gallagher is the best thing to happen to guest hosts in radio ever. Mike Gallagher, you have a great one.
Congratulations.
I look forward to seeing you on one of the weeks that you work. I love you too. Be well. I'll be right back, America. Stay tuned. Gallagher's coming up. He can tell you more about ABBA